Mary Flora Bell was born on May 26, 1957 in Newcastle upon Tyne, England. This city, known for its industrial heritage and vibrant culture, was also a place of stark contrasts. Her birthplace, Scotswood, was a rough working-class neighborhood. It was an area where the struggle for daily survival was evident in every corner. Life there was tough. Poverty cast a long shadow, affecting every aspect of life. The streets were often filled with the sounds of hardship and the sights of deprivation. Mary's arrival was met with hardship. Her mother, Betty, was just 17, a woman herself thrust into motherhood too young. Betty's youth and inexperience made the challenges of raising a child even more daunting. From the start, Mary's life was marked by instability. Her father was absent, a void never filled. This absence left a significant impact on Mary's early development and sense of security. Some whispered that he was a petty criminal, always on the run. This rumor added a layer of stigma and uncertainty to Mary's already fragile existence. But the truth remained elusive, adding another layer of mystery to Mary's already complicated beginnings. The lack of a father figure left Mary yearning for stability and guidance. Betty, ill-equipped to handle the challenges of single motherhood, struggled to provide for her young daughter. Her efforts, though earnest, often fell short of meeting their basic needs. Their home was often cold and lacking. Basic necessities were a luxury. The walls of their modest dwelling echoed with the sounds of scarcity and want. Mary's clothes were often hand-me-downs, faded and worn. They told a silent story of poverty and neglect. Each threadbare garment was a testament to the struggles they faced daily. Meals, when they came, were meager. Hunger became a familiar companion to young Mary. The pangs of hunger were a constant reminder of their dire circumstances. This was the bleak landscape of Mary's childhood. The environment around her was a reflection of the hardships she endured. It was a world where survival was the primary instinct, and love and security were painfully absent. The children of Scotswood learned early on to fend for themselves in a harsh world. Little did anyone know that this tiny, fragile child born into such despair would one day become forever linked to a darkness that would shock the nation. Her early years, filled with neglect and hardship, set the stage for a future that no one could have predicted. As Mary grew, the seeds of her troubled future were sown in the fertile ground of her tumultuous upbringing. The lack of nurturing and the constant exposure to adversity shaped her in ways that would later become tragically evident. The playgrounds of Scotswood, meant for laughter and joy, were instead places of survival and resilience. For Mary, they were a battleground where innocence was lost too soon. Mary often found herself gazing out of windows, longing for a different life, a life where she was loved and cared for. But such dreams were distant and unattainable in the harsh reality she faced. The isolation and neglect she experienced began to take a toll on her young mind. The seeds of darkness were planted early, nurtured by the environment of despair and abandonment. Despite the overwhelming odds, there were fleeting moments of hope in Mary's early life. These brief glimpses of happiness were rare but cherished, providing a temporary escape from her grim reality. Mary's journey through childhood was a solitary one, marked by a constant struggle for survival and a desperate search for love and acceptance. Her early years were a prelude to a story that would later captivate and horrify the world. Mary's early years were not just defined by poverty but also by a more insidious evil, abuse. From the very beginning, her life was a series of dark and painful episodes that left indelible marks on her young soul. Whispers followed Betty, painting her as a woman prone to fits of rage and violence. The community around them was small, and rumors spread quickly, often fueled by the visible signs of turmoil in their household. Whether fueled by the pressures of her own life or a deeper darkness within, Betty's anger often found its target in young Mary. The outbursts were frequent and unpredictable, leaving Mary in a constant state of fear and anxiety. Neighbors recounted chilling tales of Mary's cries echoing from the small house. The walls of their modest home seemed to trap the sounds of her suffering, amplifying the horror for those who lived nearby. They spoke of seeing bruises on Mary's small arms, her face bearing the marks of harsh treatment. These were not isolated incidents but a grim pattern that painted a picture of relentless abuse. These were not the accidental injuries of a rambunctious child but the deliberate infliction of pain by the one person who should have protected her. Each mark on her body was a testament to the cruelty she endured. Betty's cruelty, however, extended beyond physical abuse. The emotional scars she inflicted were perhaps even more damaging, leaving Mary with a deep sense of worthlessness and despair. She subjected Mary to a campaign of emotional torment that left scars deeper than any bruise. The constant belittling and verbal assaults eroded Mary's self-esteem, making her feel isolated and unloved. There were stories of Betty forcing Mary to tell people she was her little sister, ashamed to be known as the mother of a child she clearly resented. This twisted manipulation further confused and hurt Mary, blurring the lines of her identity. Other rumors painted an even more disturbing picture. The whispers grew darker, suggesting that Betty's cruelty knew no bounds. Some whispered that Betty, involved in sex work, forced Mary to participate in her dangerous trade. The thought of a child being exposed to such a world is almost too horrific to contemplate. While the veracity of these claims remains shrouded in the shadows of time, the mere existence of such allegations speaks volumes about the toxic environment in which Mary grew. The darkness that surrounded her was pervasive and inescapable. The trauma inflicted on Mary was relentless, shaping her in ways no child should endure. Each day was a battle for survival, leaving her emotionally and psychologically scarred. It was a crucible that forged a chilling resilience in her, but also ignited a dangerous cocktail of anger, resentment, and a profound disconnect from the world around her. The anger that simmered within her was a direct result of the relentless abuse she faced. Mary's innocence was stolen long before the lives of two young boys were tragically cut short. The loss of her childhood innocence was a precursor to the tragic events that would later unfold. Her story, even at this early stage, was already a tragedy unfolding. The seeds of her future actions were sown in the fertile ground of her suffering, setting the stage for a heartbreaking and inevitable conclusion. The spring of 1968 brought with it a sense of unease to the community of Scotswood. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, a feeling that something was amiss. On May 11th, the lifeless body of 3-year-old Martin Brown was discovered in a derelict house. The house, once a home, now stood as a silent witness to a tragedy that would haunt the community for years to come. The discovery sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Neighbors gathered in hushed groups, their faces etched with worry and disbelief. The news spread like wildfire, leaving a trail of sorrow in its wake. It was a place where children played freely, their laughter a familiar soundtrack to daily life. The streets, once filled with the joyous sounds of play, now echoed with an eerie silence. Now that innocence was shattered. The playground stood empty, the swings swaying gently in the breeze, a stark reminder of the loss that had befallen them. Martin, a bright and cheerful child, had been found lying amidst rubble and dust. His toys, once symbols of his playful spirit, now lay abandoned, covered in a layer of grime. There were no obvious signs of violence on his small body, leaving the cause of his death a mystery. The police, faced with a perplexing case, combed through the scene for any clues that might shed light on the tragedy. The police, initially suspecting a tragic accident, began their investigation. They interviewed neighbors, searched for witnesses, and pieced together the events leading up to Martin's death. The community, grappling with grief and disbelief, clung to the hope that it was just a terrible misfortune. Vigils were held, candles lit in memory of the young boy whose life was cut tragically short. Whispers of the tragedy reached the Bell household. The news was met with a mix of shock and sorrow as the family tried to make sense of the senseless loss. Mary, barely 11 years old at the time, seemed strangely unaffected by the news that had cast a pall over the community. While others wept and mourned, she remained eerily calm, her expression unreadable. While other children were kept close, their parents' fears reflected in their watchful eyes, Mary remained oddly detached. Parents held their children tighter, their protective instincts heightened by the tragedy. Her reaction, or lack thereof, to Martin's death would later become a chilling detail in the unfolding narrative of her life. It was a detail that would haunt those who knew her, a sign of the darkness that lay beneath her seemingly innocent exterior. The inquest into Martin Brown's death returned an open verdict. The lack of conclusive evidence frustrated the police and left the community with a gnawing sense of uncertainty. Martin's death, while officially unexplained, cast a long shadow over Scotswood. Parents, once accustomed to the sight of children playing freely in the streets, now kept a watchful eye on their little ones. The carefree atmosphere of the neighborhood had been replaced by an undercurrent of fear and suspicion. Amidst the growing unease, whispers began to circulate about Mary Bell. Her name, uttered in hushed tones, became associated with a growing list of disturbing incidents. Locals recounted seeing Mary near the derelict house where Martin's body was found. Others spoke of strange and unsettling behavior, a coldness in her eyes that sent shivers down their spines. Children, often more attuned to the unspoken language of fear and intuition, began to avoid Mary. They spoke of her in hushed whispers, sharing stories of her odd pronouncements and unsettling demeanor. She became an outsider, isolated not just by the circumstances of her upbringing but also by the growing suspicion that surrounded her. The summer of 1968 was a tense time in Scotswood. The shadow of Martin Brown's death lingered, the unanswered questions amplifying the community's unease. Parents remained wary, their instincts telling them that danger still lurked. Children, once symbols of unbridled joy and innocence, were now kept under close watch, their freedom curtailed by the fear that had gripped the neighborhood. Mary Bell, meanwhile, continued to be a subject of speculation and concern. Her name was often linked to acts of petty vandalism and cruelty to animals. These incidents, while seemingly minor in isolation, took on a sinister significance when viewed through the lens of Martin's unexplained death. The fear and suspicion surrounding Mary were palpable. Some saw her as a troubled child, a victim of her circumstances. Others viewed her with a mixture of apprehension and fear, convinced that she possessed a darkness that set her apart from other children. In this climate of unease, a tragedy even more shocking than Martin Brown's death was about to unfold, one that would forever etch Mary Bell's name into the annals of criminal history.